doing a webinar today on scaling personalization across the customer journey. That's the topic for today's webinar. So we have seen personalized one-on-one experiences can increase sales and influence consumer behavior, which isn't exactly a novel idea. We've seen reports which show that 40% of consumers say that they've purchased something more expensive than they originally thought of buying. So you may go to an Amazon, you want to buy an iPhone, you end up buying the other things which come with the iPhone, the AirPod, the new cover. So that is something a lot of consumers complain about when it comes to personalization, but it actually makes more sense for the brand. On the other part, we see that businesses need a sophisticated tech stack to create these personalizations. But the question here is it necessary to create these personalizations for these users? Do you need a heavy tech stack? What kind of data you should be looking at ideally in today's day and age when there is so much data available to personalize content for each and every customer? Like, should you be looking at purchase history, the browsing history, the hobbies and interests of a person? Do you need all this data to personalize and engage with your users? So those are some of the questions we're going to be talking about, and we'll try to answer in today's webinar. And to discuss all this, we have three amazing guests. I'm going to start with Uzair. Uzair, if you can give a quick intro about yourself.
Hi guys, I'm the CEO of HeyU. HeyU is the largest order ahead app in Australia for food and coffee ordering. Before that, worked for Careem, one of the largest ride-hailing app companies in the Middle East. And prior to that, had a couple of corporate roles at Cisco and KPMG.
Okay, I'll jump in. So I'm Tony Wilcox. I work with AppsFlyer. We've just moved to Australia to launch the Sydney office as of yesterday. So really excited about that, just as what we're having a chat with today and the panel that I'm part of.
Cool. Saurabh.
Yep, thank you. So my name is Saurabh. I am from MoEngage. I look after the entire ANZ region, APAC region here. Been in the industry 5-6 years in this particular digital industry. Prior to that, I was living in Melbourne, worked for Cisco as well as I didn't know that he used to work for Cisco. I was actually in the distribution space with Westcon. Had my own business back in the day, which was a system integration business on Collins Street, Melbourne, and now living in Singapore, looking after MoEngage's business in the APAC market. Thank you, Eddie.
Thanks, Saurabh. Thanks, Uzair and Tony. So before we start the session, I'm going to do a quick 2-minute intro about what MoEngage is, because I'm assuming a lot of people wouldn't know what MoEngage does. So I'm just going to take out 2 minutes and give you a quick glance into who we are and what we do. Just give me a second to present my screen. Yes. So MoEngage is an intelligent customer engagement and analytics platform. What I mean by that is we are a company which integrates with your app and your website. We analyze what people do. So who's coming on the website or the app, where are they opening in, what are they looking at? If you're an e-commerce company, what kind of products are people looking at? So is the person looking to purchase shoes, or is the person looking to purchase mobile gadgets? And on the basis of that, we allow you to do real-time segmentation of your users. And basis on that segmentation, we allow you to engage with your users in a very personalized manner across channels. So it can be a push notification, an email, an SMS, depending on choice of the users. And all these notifications are sent in a very personalized manner again. And I'm sorry, I'm going to use that word again, because we try to add the experience the user has had before on the website and app to that communication. And that's wherein the personalization comes in. These are some of our clients in Australia. So we've been operating in Australia in the past 5-6 months. Oyo and Ola being two of our global clients, which have their presence in Australia. Jimmy brings an alcohol delivery app. Tammy Fit and Keep It Cleaner are two of the health and fitness apps doing pretty well in Australia. So these are some of our customers in Australia. When you talk about across the world, we are working with the likes of Flipkart, Tokopedia, Deutsche Telekom, Airtel, Ally Bank. So we're working across sectors. It's not only e-commerce or apps. We're also working with retail clients. We're working with OTTs in India like Airtel, Hungama. We're also working with some fintech players. When it comes to the accolades, a lot of people need to choose a tool which has a substantial knowledge in the market, and the market also knows about the tool. These are some of the industry accolades we've received. So we're a company which has been cited in the Gartner Magic Quadrant. We're the youngest and the only Asian company to be named as a leader in the same. We're part of the Forrester report. And finally, this is the architecture of our play, like as to how we make this model work. We capture data from your apps, your websites, any API backend data, any data from our partners like AppsFlyer, any acquisition data, and all this data is captured to create a single view of the customer. And we use this single view to either run the marketing automation piece, which is sending all those notifications, push notifications, in-apps, emails, and SMS, or you can use analytics to understand what your users are doing on a daily basis. So this is how our platform works. These are some of the channels we are on, like push notifications, in-apps, app inbox, emails, and even website. So that's about us. And if you guys want to know more, probably you can catch up with us later or connect with us after the webinar. Cool. Thank you, guys. I'm going to stop sharing now. And I'm going to get started with the webinar. And the first question we have here is actually for everyone. So the first question is, personalization used to be about getting the right message in front of the right person. But now companies have to look at so many things like which channel, which device, look at a person's intent, location, and so much more. So the problem here is there is a lot of complexity, but is it really worth it? So maybe Uzair, if you can give it a go first, and you can explain from your thoughts and your experience.
So one of the most inspiring stories that I heard about personalizing the experience for people was this. I think this was basically a city district which had what they'd done is that they had combined information from multiple channels. So from hospitals, from call centers, from emergency services and all. And what they had done was that they implemented this within the ambulance service, right? So they would actually send an ambulance to an area before an accident actually occurred. And why that's very critical was because, like in these, like accidents, every second counts. So if you can have an ambulance which arrives 3 seconds or 5 seconds or 10 seconds earlier, right, then you're talking about saving a human life, right? So that, I think, puts things into context why this personalization and why this ability to sort of like really understand what's happening across different channels is quite helpful, right? So nothing can be more important than saving human lives, right? So that's one example. And then if the other example that I think about is what Jeff Bezos famously says, right? That Amazon is going to be able to predict what you want before you actually want that actual thing, right? So that's basically, I think, two powerful examples in terms of like what combining information across multiple channels and then basically utilizing it to the best of ability can sort of like do for you as a company.
Thanks, Uzair. Actually, that was a really, really good example. But the Jeff Bezos point is a little scary because we'll end up spending so much more, which we don't need to. I'm going to come to Tony next. Tony, if you can, highlight your views on the same.
Sure. Yeah, I agree, Uzair. I mean, that's a great analogy, particularly on the ambulances, right? Just shows how critical it is. So yes, I mean, is it worth it? Is the complexities around personalization worth it? Yes, but probably more importantly for some of the growth managers listening is keep it simple first, right? There's tons of technologies out there. There's multiple data sets that you're going to have to deal with or already are dealing with. So to plan as much as you can early, great, but keep it simple. If you select maybe one channel first and nail that, and then build from that, that would be the best advice.
Okay, cool. I think so. Basically, keeping it simple, right? Like starting with simple, understanding the basic segments, and then targeting them. I'm going to come to Saurabh next. Saurabh, if you can give us a few highlights here.
Yeah, sure. One word you messaged there, Arijit, is complexity. Things
Yep.
get complex if we don't plan them early. That's when you hit complexity. For me, the important part is to plan it thoroughly before we let our customers in this space go ahead and do something. And if we spend some more time in the planning stage way early, then they wouldn't hit brick walls. Simple example is people trying to enable email marketing. There's a lot of customers in Southeast Asia who don't do it. There's GDPR in place, PDP in place, there's IP warm up, there's challenges where emails might end up in spam. So if you just use MailChimp and start doing email marketing on day one, you're going to hit those problems. So you've got to work with an expert who's an expert in this space and look at these problems before they occur. Hence, remove the complexity. From a channel perspective, every business is different. Some businesses would work on email marketing, some prefer push notifications, etc. Again, comes down to business drivers and what's going to make them successful. Hence, planning is early and working with experts is very important here in my view.
Okay, so basically, complexity is something which we on our own, and we can actually remove it if we take certain steps. Okay, cool. That's also actually something interesting. I'm going to start with another question for you, Saurabh. So you were talking about complexity. I want to understand what are the key elements which are needed to put together an end-to-end personalization strategy, and if that foundation is absolutely critical. So you talked about tackling complexity before it happens. So gathering a lot of data and then starting a lot of campaigns. But how can you ensure that that complexity doesn't happen if you can put an end-to-end personalization strategy? So if you can give me an insight in that as well.
Sure. So from what I've seen, a lot of businesses still feel personalization is a cookie cut approach. You have hi Arijit on an email, and that means personalization. Or you looked at shoes, so I am sending you content on shoes, and that's personalization. I think the first wave of personalization was when we started receiving emails. Remember back in Australia, you might remember, Tony, Catch of the Day, the big e-commerce company. Ruslan started Kogan.com, and Catch of the Day came about. They had a warehouse in Geelong. That was the first time they used to do a sale at 12 p.m. every day, and it used to get stocked out. They never had to do email marketing because their strategy was they're going to sell one product a day, and the sale is going to start at 12 p.m. And typically about 1:30, 2 p.m., they would run out of stock. So what was their personalization? How did they sell all of that stock? Their strategy was they're going to find unique products, sell it at under the market value. They're going to commit to stock for that particular sale only, no email marketing required. So their personalization to the market was come and buy stock before we run out of stock because you're not going to buy it anywhere else cheaper than what we're selling it. If you look at catchoftheday.com.au today, they're now catch.com.au 10 years down the road. Now they sell multiple products. And now they have to personalize using email marketing or push notifications. And when you receive content from them, if I looked at shoes, doesn't mean that you just have to send me shoes information. There could be things related to shoes. What's important is to understand what is the size of the shoe, because that's the unique thing about me. If I looked at Adidas, doesn't mean I'm just going to buy Adidas, but I am definitely going to buy size 10, right? So for me, personalization end-to-end is understanding your user and your business objectives. I was talking to somebody only a couple of days ago. They're a food app here in Singapore, and they're revamping their personalization strategy. And right up on the screen, they wanted to put Hi Tony. And my question was, why are you putting Hi Tony there? What is the objective of Hi Tony? And the answer was, we are trying to personalize the experience. So I said, have you heard of Food Panda? Obviously, everybody's heard of Food Panda in this market. If you open a Food Panda, they don't even ask your name. You can actually go all the way from screen one, place an order. All you have to provide is your address. They don't even ask you your name. But Food Panda is a very successful company. So what is the personalization strategy for Food Panda then? Personalization there is food choices, what's nearby, what's available today. It has nothing to do with my name. So they don't even collect the name. So looking at your personal business objectives, what kind of data you have available, where you think you can go in the next 6 months and 12 months based on that kind of personalization. It's a very complex equation to solve. But again, work with experts, work with people who've been in this space. If you're going through digital transformation, but if you're been in this space, then there's this thing called keep asking why. Why are we personalizing it this way? Do we need to personalize just the first name, last name, content, the screen of the website, etc., etc.? So look at the data, research the data. But Uzair runs this kind of business. So I'm looking forward to hearing from him, having worked in the taxi company and now running a food app as well.
Yep. Thanks, Saurabh. Thanks a lot. I'm going to directly jump to Tony on this. So,
okay.
Tony, do you think for their personalization strategy, can brands use tech and have a trial and error approach without putting in too much investment to test out their personalization strategies? Do you think tech can make that possible in a cost-efficient way?
Yeah, I mean, the beauty of us being in the digital world is we don't have to rely on, qualitative research, right? As much as these focus groups might be valuable, it's much better to be running live tests. And all of the technologies, almost all, right, assuming that it's something like a MoEngage or something else in the paid growth stack, you can run tests, multiple tests. And that's the flexibility that these technologies enable us. It enables us to scale these tests quickly and to be continuously running them either on the side to always improve, incrementally improve, or to test before a product is live, right? A test app, whatever it is. So yeah, it's critical. It's definitely possible, as we probably all know on this call and the listeners too. It's more around having the technology there enables you to scale these tests, and it's critical to success. I've heard many stories out there where you think your target market is women between their 40s and 50s looking at fitness wear, when it turns out that it might be something completely different, right? And we can only know that as the market speaks, but we can only know that through testing.
Okay, cool. So basically you're saying like a lot of A/B testing and all can give you indicative data on what the brand can leverage in the future, and you don't have to heavily invest into old data sets. You can actually test them out, get the data, and then use it, right? Cool. So I think I'm going to get to Uzair now. So Uzair, you're the only one who's running a company here. So to be honest, most of us are talking from our points of views, but you're the one who actually knows what is happening. So if you can give insight into the crafting of a customer journey on your app, like what do you look to define an ideal journey for anyone who installs the app and till the person makes a first purchase? So if you can give an insight into how do you plan it, and that'll be great.
Sure, right. So just going on to this point, I think an important point which was made by Saurabh and Tony was basically on this thing in terms of testing things, right? And I think it's really, really important to understand this. It's, like there's this quote which says that believe in terms of like what people do rather than what people say, right? And then if I go back and sort of like relate to this, when you go to Henry Ford, and he said that if I did customer research back then and asked what people wanted, they said we wanted faster horses, right? So there was no concept of a car at that point in time, right? So, and then if I look at our experience as well, right, like at Kareem, in terms of like so we were launching in Saudi, and primarily our target market was females, right? And had we listened to our customers and asked them to ride with a total stranger in a conservative society like Saudi, asking females to get into a car with a male who they don't know, who basically is coming in an unmarked car, right? So we would have not launched the service at all. So, I think it's very important to sometimes just launch things in an incremental way. And really, like what Saurabh said, that's really, really important, is that really understand the why option of it, right? Like, why are we doing it? And if there are some roadblocks from the customer side, really understanding what those roadblocks are in the customer journey, right? Like, so in our case at K, it was like, why would someone not take a ride with a complete stranger, right? So what are issues around that, right? And when we boiled down to it, it was basically around security, right? And it's all about perceived security, right? Like, why would people feel safer in a taxi? It's also like a complete stranger. It's not that the taxi guy, right? What makes that taxi guy, uh, you, perception of that taxi guy more secure than basically a private car, right? So, and then you boil down to it, oh, okay, it's because of the perception that this person has probably gone through some checks and all, and therefore they don't have any criminal record and all, right? So, okay, that's one aspect. What else, right? So if we can provide that personalized experience to that customer by questioning why, right? Like, what's important to the customer, then basically you can solve that customer journey problem. And then I think, like, if you look at the customer journey aspect as well, right? Like, what you as a company need to plan in terms of personalization is that what's the end goal, right? What does a customer mean for you as a company, right? Is it basically getting them to be aware of the brand? Is it basically to getting them to download the app? Is it basically getting them to sign up on the app? Is it basically to use the app once? Is it basically to get them use multiple times? Is it like in all of these? Why I mentioned this is that it sort of seems simple, right? But all customers are not equal, right? And what you need to do is, in terms of like understanding what the ideal customer journey is for you, and then what segment of those customers can give you that ideal journey, right? So if I look at the Kareem context back then, right, it was the most relevant use case for us was was females who are looking to get to work, right? And they don't have a reliable method of doing it in a repeat basis. So then basically the personalization experience is, okay, this is what the customer journey should entail, right? It should talk about security, it should talk about reliability, it should talk about, and then again, like, I think I'm sort of like doing a fine balance, because if you start adding too many things into the message, which is what Tony pointed out as well, that it becomes too complicated, right? Like, you need to sort of like narrow it down to one attribute that communicates multiple things, and then basically really hammer down on that, right? So if you feel that the most important thing for the customer in terms of like coming on board is security, then you need to hammer that message down at every single message in terms of talking to the customer should sort of like talk about that specific experience and trying to nail that down.
Cool. So, in terms of your app, is there any particular keyword you actually hammer it down in your strategy? Like, so you are a coffee and a food booking app, right? You can pre-book it before you go to the place. That's my assumption. I can be wrong here. Is there a particular message you ensure is always a part of your communication strategy? Like, is there something?
Yeah. So this is interesting as well, right? Because when we look at our app, once again, the behavior of different users on the app is different, right? So you can sort of broadly categorize into two things, right? One is basically food, and one is basically coffee and drinks, right? Coffee and hot drinks. But then even within food, it could be that sort of only likes pizzas, right? Like, if I'm personalizing my message and showing him salad options, then I'm sort of like wasting valuable real estate space on the app, right? Maybe for Tony, he's a coffee drinker, but all he drinks is long black, right? Then if I'm sort of showing him all of these plant-based coffees, which is the new trend, right? Like, although it's the trend, it's growing, all of that, right? But it's basically useless to Tony, right? Because he just has a long black, right? So I think it's these things that are not very easy to build for, right? And then, like when you're trying to personalize, right? Like, and I think we're going to get to it I just wanted to sort of touch upon this point, is that scaling that personalization, that sort of becomes like something that you need to sort of keep in mind as well, right? So yeah, like that's why it's pretty complicated in terms of like what happens.
So thanks, Zed. Thanks a lot. I think one of the other important things about personalization, especially the messaging we send, is deep linking those messages back to relevant pages, right? When you send, say, a message saying this coffee is again available, if the person clicks on it, the person needs to go back to the page where the coffee is directly available. And deep linking is one of the most powerful tools in today's marketing tech stack, which actually create very, again, I'll say the word personalized experiences. And I'm going to go to Tony. So Tony, if you can give an idea on to, what are the best practices for marketers while defining their deep linking strategy.
Yeah, sure. It's so deep linking is an enabler, right? And compared to Uzer's story and on the coffee choices, etc., it's actually much more simple, right? But it's necessary part of the journey. So all deep linking is that bridge between the mobile web and in-app, whether it's an email, SMS, mobile website, whatever, and then directing them into the app. Now, the first thing there is, before we get into all of the intricacies of behavioral targeting with deep linking, it's, do the deep links work? Right? How terrible is it when if a user, say they have the app, then they get sent to the app store, right? So it's going to be a bit frustrating. The second thing that might happen is that maybe the user has the app, they expect to get taken to somewhere targeted within the app, and an error 404 happens. So they don't even get into the app. Third one might be that, look, they get taken to the intro page to re-register when they've already registered. So deep linking solves for all of those. First one being most important, the fact that it does a break or not, make sure you're working with a provider that can deal with all operating systems. Then we want to get into the magic of deep linking, right? A deep link where that just sends a user to the login page and doesn't take in any capacity around meta tagging and around events that might be relevant to understand about those users and to put into the deep link. The less you have in the deep link, the less targeted you can be, right? So back to planning, what are the events that are important to target? Is it the fact that I like iced Americanos, I like coffees from the South American region, sometimes dabble in Thailand region. Whatever those events are, they can be input into the deep link, and you can push those users deep within the app, assuming you're speaking to them in the mobile web space.
Thanks, Tony. I personally am a big fan of deep linking, because if that's not there, you jump on the app, you're trying to buy that coffee, you click on it, you go to the home page, and then you have to again search for the coffee. It actually hinders the experience. So having those deep links really, really helps. I'm going to go back to Zair. Zair, can you tell us, how do you segment your audiences right now? Like, so when you're creating a campaign, like what kind of things do you look to build your audiences? Is there any particular data or behavioral pattern you look for to build these custom segments?
Yeah, so I guess like in terms of segmentation, right, it sort of like boils down to location, right? And the reason why that's important is that when you look at location, a user in busy central districts, right? So in CBDs here, right, like central business districts over here, would behave very differently to a user in the suburb, right? And you need to be conscious of that, right? Like, so in terms of like, in terms of behavior, for example, right, like generally speaking, what we've noticed is that in suburbs, people have slightly more time, right? And so they're not just ordering their coffees, but they're often ordering food items with it. So it becomes more important for us to sort of like surface up the relevant breakfast choices along with their coffee, and that sort of leads to conversion. Whereas in the city, people are a bit more on the rush, right? And from our experience, if we look at our average basket size in the city versus suburbs, what we see is that in the suburbs, average basket size is almost 50% higher than CBD. But then when we look at the frequency of users in busy CBDs, right, it's much higher than what it's in suburbs. So that's one aspect of it, right? And then basically it also, like then basically every user is very different as well, right? There are people who like to have coffee once in a while, right? So it's a social thing for them. There are people who sort of have only one coffee in the morning time, and then they're basically users who are sort of like having multiple cups of coffee, and they would have a lunch and all as well. So, so I guess like every user has a very, very unique behavioral pattern, and when you're targeting to them, right, like I think you need to sort of like figure out what's going to be relevant. So let me sort of give you an example right now, right, like which is going to sort of like put things into context, right? In terms of users who are regularly buying a coffee, there's no point of offering them a discount, right? And when it comes to coffee, for example, right, like what we've realized is that people are really set in their ways, right? So if going back to this example, right, like if Tony has a long black every day, I'm not likely to convert Tony into drinking so these
Really,
sorry, so these days it's pretty like trendy to buy these plant-based coffees, right, like oat milk or soya milk and all that, right, or almond milk, right? Like that's basically becoming a hot commodity item. But like, can I really get Tony to switch from a long black, which he's had for the past 10 years, to almond milk by just offering him a discount on that, right? Or getting him to sample it, right? Like that sort of seems not likely. And then from a user perspective, it's going to be perceived as quite spammy as well, right? So it's kind of those things that you need to take into account. So I guess like when I'm looking at it, right, so there's things which you need to personalize, but then there's basically messaging that everyone stands for together as well. So those messages like are bigger themes, right? So for example, like from our perspective, right, one of the things that we stand for as a company is supporting our local communities. Now, when you're supporting your local communities, right, like if you are presenting that message and framing it into that context, then it becomes easier to personalize messages accordingly. Because when you're talking about supporting your local community, then everyone is for it, right? But what it means for Tony could be very different for what it means to Saurabh, right? So just to give this example, right, like and these are like personal choices. Like maybe for Tony, when you talk about supporting local communities, what we can do is we can push him to use reusable cups, right? We're like, you know what, these are reusable cups. We'll make the experience similar to you, but this helps us save these many cups which go into waste every day, right? Like something along those lines, right? For Saurabh, it could be something different, right? Like he's sort of seen that he's got some sort of like understanding that reducing dairy milk could sort of like help the local community as well, right? Like reducing the consumption of that. So in that context, right, the overarching theme is the same, which is supporting your local communities, but then you're personalizing messages according to what you feel would be relevant based on people's behavior.
Thanks a lot. I actually like I heard a few points you were talking about. You were talking about you look at basket sizes varying from suburbs to central business districts. You were also talking about which customer to show discounts to in order to change behavioral patterns and how it doesn't make sense. Uh, so I'm going to quickly ask this question to you, and then I'm going to go to Saurabh with this. Do you create any RFM type of matrix wherein you score each and every customer on the basis of when did they last come on the app, how much money they generate on the app, and how often do they like come on the app? So like a recency frequency monitoring matrix, is this something you create right now to score each and every user?
Um, So I don't think we've got something as sophisticated at this point in time, right? But having said that, yes, we do look at user behaviors, right? Like, and we try to sort of like customize our messaging according to that user behavior, right? So, um, and this is basically an ongoing process, right? Like you would not perfect it at any point in time, because this is like behaviors keep on changing as well, right? And then with this COVID thing, right, what we've realized is what you plan for is not what happens, right? So there has been a huge change in behavior because of this COVID thing as well, in terms of what we've seen in customer. So to answer you in short, right, like yes, we probably don't have a very sophisticated method of scoring each and every customer, but we do keep this in mind in terms of customer behavior. And at times, right, like what we do is we exclude um, users who are showing certain behavior from certain promotions, right? Because we don't want to cannibalize our revenue as well, right? Some user who's already, so I'm hoping that our users are not listening to this, because then they might actually start churning away from the platform just to ensure that they get like some promotions and all. But yes, like it's basically like it's all about building behavior, right? And when you're talking about building behavior, right, like you need to sort of think long term. One of the biggest learnings uh, that is sort of maybe it's not counterintuitive, right? But it's basically when you make things a bit harder for people to achieve, what you see is you narrow down the funnel of people coming in, but the people who come through that funnel are a lot stickier, right? So the interesting thing, what we found out, and maybe it's obvious to other people, right? Like maybe you guys have sort of like experienced this through other companies, right? But we have to sort of go through this learning, is that the interesting thing, what we found was that when we actually reduce the cost of acquisition, right? So counterintuitive, right? Like we reduce the cost of acquisition. What we saw was that lifetime value actually increased of those customers, because what we did was we narrowed down the funnel. Previously, we would get like a larger funnel because our cost of acquisition was higher, so everyone was coming through that funnel, but then there would be a huge drop off as well, right? When we actually, like consciously made this decision that let's create some friction points of getting people into the door, because when we create that friction, what you would see is that people would pass through it. It sort of becomes like a privilege, right? So they would become a lot more valuable customers, right? So it's like inversely correlated that lower cost of acquisition actually yielded to higher lifetime value of customers. And we're like, wow, this is brilliant, right? Like this is exactly what we want to do. And that sort of slows down your growth, right? But it builds sustainable growth. And I think this is basically the other thing which COVID has done to businesses like us, right? Like all of us have been forced to sort of compromise growth over sustainability, right? And I think this is what probably like a lot of other companies are going through as well.
Yes, that's totally true, and I really like the example of the queue bit, because that's an example what a lot of posh clubs do all over London, New York, wherein you have to stand in the line and you have to wait. You have to feel privileged to enter that. So thanks a lot for that. I'm quickly going to go to Saurabh. So Saurabh, I'll have two questions here. So now there are a lot of channels. How do you create a best mix of all the channels as to what channels you should be using when it comes to SMS, push emails? And also if you can give a few insights at the latter end on the RFM bit. So like Jose talked about a few things on what kind of consumer segments they're creating. So if I can get insights from you as well.
Sure. So just before we go, Uzair, there's a comment in the chat box, somebody who uses your app regularly. I found it very insightful. You actually have a customer there. Michael, if you're listening to us, we read your comments. Thank you for sharing. So from a channel perspective, again, it's deep science in the modern world. Looking at the data, we need to understand what channels are working, what channels are not working. And also, like Uzair mentioned, every customer is different, every human being is different. Every business is different, from a taxi company like Ola Cabs in Australia, who we work with, to TamiFit. Their customers are different and their business models are different. So the channels have to be different as well. You can't have a single channel strategy for every company. The way to do this is to rely on technology and look at the data. there's tech available, there's data available. As an example, let's say, as I mentioned earlier, creating a bit of friction in the early stages to make sure you have the right people coming down the funnel who start using your tech, who start using your services, and then they're going to stick around longer. It's just looking at the data and building those strategies to make sure that people stick around. Let's say you sent out 1 million emails, and out of 1 million emails, only 200 people clicked on that email. But you sent out 1 million SMSs with a voucher code, and out of that, you got 400,000 transactions. What will you do next time? Will you cut down your email and increase your SMS budget? But how frequently would you send an SMS? Because SMS becomes very intrusive. It's not something that we use day-to-day basis. So if you were using one email a day today or one email a week, would you see, okay, I had success with email, and I'm just going to switch it with SMS, and I'm going to start doing one SMS a week. Do it once, look at the data, and see if anyone unsubscribed. And if anybody dropped off, that is a leading indicator that you can't replicate email channel with SMS channel, because they give your consumer two different types of experiences. Email, I check when I log into my email. I'm not checking my email all day long. But SMS beeps up, and right away I will look at the phone screen, because we live in the world where SMSs are no longer common. So there are two different channels, and it's important to look at the data that's being generated at the far side of the campaign you ran. In the mobile and the web industry, I think push notifications are the most fruitful channel. They should be used extensively, but very wisely. They should be the first mode of communication, because you're reaching out to a user directly on the phone through the app that you've created, and hence you're giving them a brand experience as well. There's flexibility available from a tech perspective where you can create different kind of templates, themes around your push notification, and that's the flexibility you don't have on SMS. You have it on email, but everybody uses email. It's no different to somebody else doing it. Personalization is key here. I give this example to everyone, so I'm going to use it here. Back when I used to work for Purple Wi-Fi based in Melbourne, I was in Auckland City one day, and I went to just shop around in the evening, and everybody knows the Warehouse Group. Warehouse Group is a big supermarket company. So I used to be working in the Wi-Fi space, guest Wi-Fi space, and Auckland City was one of our customers. I went to Warehouse, one of the stores just in the city, Auckland City, to see if they offer public Wi-Fi, and I connected to their Wi-Fi using my first name and email address. And they've been sending me email messages since then. I actually recently unsubscribed because it became so boring to see their emails. They send me emails related to sewing machines. They want to sell me iPhones. Now the data is available for them to capture it in real time and realize I am not living in Australia. I'm a guest. That data is available, but they didn't capture it. What they've also not been able to capture is I went to their venue only once, and that was probably early 2016. So I've never come back into their venue. Since then, maybe they've sent me about 300 emails. I don't know how many other users are in that market that went into their shop, connected to the Wi-Fi. Let's say over the past year, they've sent about 1 million emails to people who don't even live in Auckland City, who don't even live in New Zealand. First, waste of money. They're diluting their brand. They're giving me a bad experience. It's in a bit of a way spam for me. Maybe they've changed it now, but back in the day, they were just bombarding people senselessly with emails. So it's a cheap channel to use, but without the data behind it, without the science behind it, and realizing, should we be sending a message to this person or should we just not bother? It's that top of the funnel approach. Are we creating a negative experience by using this channel for this user? So those are the things one should look at. From an RFM perspective, let's pick up two different industries. Let's pick up e-commerce and let's pick up OTT as an example. Let's pick up Cash of the Day or a business like Amazon and pick up Netflix. So from an RFM perspective, your champion users would not only just spend most amount of time on your digital real estate and most amount of money on your digital real estate. In the OTT space, they'll spend more time looking at the content that you're offering to them. They will search more content. How do you leverage those users then? The best way so RFM, recency, frequency, and monetary value. The algorithm runs across the data, and the algorithm then says, well, these 20% users are your champions in your digital real estate. For Netflix, there would be people who look at variety of content. They spend a lot of time on Netflix. And the ones, as an example, in our tech, MoEngage tech, about to lose, there's a category about to lose would be somebody who's not opened up the app in about 2 to 3 weeks. So maybe they're no longer going to be a subscriber of Netflix. How do you leverage that data then? RFM is very important to look at where are users sitting in your funnel. If you want to improve your, let's say, App Store rating or just the user rating on your own website, who would you go to? Somebody who's about to sleep, somebody who's a new user, or would you go to a champion? You'd obviously go to a champion who's been getting the highest scoring based on machine learning that we've created. And if somebody is about to sleep and they were, let's say, a high value customer, let's say a Netflix customer who's got 4 logins for the entire family, and all of a sudden they're not even opening up the app. You would be curious what happened. What was the last content they searched? Were they searching for something that's not available on our platform? Is there a content problem? Is there a pricing problem in the market? Are there any other customers who are showing similar traits? So these all become leading indicators for you. Maybe there's nothing at the end of it, but they become leading indicators for you to realize if we are about to hit a problem. Can we foresee this problem looking at the RFM model? That's my take on RFM. I find customers using it very actively in the market.
Thanks, Saurabh. Thanks a lot. I have a question for Tony. And after that, Uzair, there's a question from one of your users, which I'll ask you. So, Tony, first thing, how do you measure personalization, the success of personalization? Like, what are the metrics you should look at? And what are the metrics you recommend that companies should look at to, see the efficiency and effectiveness of the campaigns they run?
Okay. As much as possible, think about this broadly, right? Now, we've Black Friday sales coming on tomorrow. There's a ton of opportunity here, right? And if it is just around getting the sale, there might be a lost opportunity. The opportunity that hopefully advertisers are looking at is lifetime value. So if you acquire a customer, it's not just about the cost of acquisition, or of course that's important. It's about what that customer, what that segment of customers rather go on to do, right? And the game would become, once you understand LTV, lifetime value, you're able to build upon that and channel your campaigns, whether they're owned media, via push and email, or via social or paid networks, all around lifetime value. Now, instead of going more incremental into that answer, I kind of want to leave it there. There's tons of Australian advertisers that aren't yet measuring lifetime value. So they're incapable of getting more scientific around who really are the users that are going to drive them lasting value to the business.
Tony, I have a follow-up question here on acquisition strategy. So now you guys are leaders in acquisition, right? You tell people where are your users coming from. Are there any indicative measures here? Say if a person's coming from Facebook or Instagram on this particular app, are there any leading indicators on what that person's behavior is going to be? Do you give insights into that as well? Or like if there is something you can share around that?
All right. For us, the magic sauce is integrations with networks, right? So Facebook, Instagram being one, then the rest of the networks, right? And what we can do is enable you as advertisers to scale out past just 1 or 2 networks. And just that, surprisingly, is amazing, right? Being able to toggle between different networks and understand the LTV of maybe a paid campaign versus an email campaign, etc., or how they interrelate between the two, right? As opposed to guessing what exactly that user is going to do. It's more about what that might get a bit scary. It's more about the potential value of these particular sources or group of users.
Cool. Thanks a lot. That actually really helps and gives insights into this conversation. Uzair, I have one last question for you. But before that, there is a panel question. it's from Michael. Michael says that he's a frequent user of HeyU and he loves it. And his question is your target audience those people that are time poor as they avoid the queue? And the second part of that question is, does the personalization of showcasing more compact foods that can be eaten on the go end up more successful in your industry? So, yep.
So first of all, thanks, Michael, for using our app. Really appreciate your support. You've mentioned an interesting question, right? So the interesting thing for us is that I hate to answer a question like this, but it depends, right? So yes, there are time poor customers who use us to avoid the queue, but that's not just the reason, right? That people like. So I think like, especially given COVID, what we saw was that we became like a way of, like an app which sort of like adhered to social distancing guidelines, right? So a lot of people started using us to avoid contact, right? So that's basically one of the newer things. And then traditionally what we've seen is that in the suburbs, it's not about avoiding queues because they're not queues and all. It's just about timing your efforts as well, right? A lot of people, especially when you've got kids and you're sort of like doing your Saturday morning runs to classes of your children and all, right? So it just makes it very convenient to order ahead. And especially for coffee connoisseurs, right? Like at times it's a bit embarrassing to be standing in front of the counter and then sort of saying that, okay, I would like, like cappuccino, extra hot, 3/4, almond milk, all of that, right? So, and then the chances of getting your order wrong become significantly higher as well, right? Especially when you're in a hurry. So I think all of that the app takes care of. Now, the second part of your question, that should we actually then target compact food items as well on the go to sort of cater for that audience? Um, so what we are trying to do is that promoting people to add an item which would be relevant to add with their coffees, right? So whether it's avocado toast, whether it's croissants and all that, right? And we prompt that, right? So people, and we've sort of got a category which says people who bought this have also added, right? And then you would sort of see these choices. Currently it's generic, but we're trying to personalizing it to people. That's basically the goal, whereby currently it's basically based on the best selling items of that venue, but the plan is to sort of like make it personalized to people's choices to get that. But then the second part of your question is quite interesting, is because what we've realized is that food choices are a bit different, and a lot of the times people do have time on their hands, especially when we're talking about people in the city. They've got 1 hour for lunch, whereas for coffee they've got no time, right? Generally speaking, people are running late to work and they want their coffee as well. So this is a great app which sort of like resonates really well with people. For lunch, I guess the value proposition then becomes basically curating people's choices and sort of surfacing and sort of sharing this Jeff Bezos example, right? Surfacing what people would want before they actually are in that mood. And you'd be surprised in terms of how predictable people are. When we're looking at data, right? Now, this is interesting. There was one person who had like the same type of salad 300 days of the year, right? And we're quite surprised. Majority of the cases are not like that. But, what you would see is that people have like 4 or 5 choices that they generally make, and then they sort of like surface through it, right? Like they would sort of like go through a round robin fashion, and it's not very what do you call scientific. There would be days when they would have pizzas twice a week, for example, right? But most people have these choices. So if we can sort of like curate that and then basically take that experience and replicate it with them when they change the location as well, right? So if you're in Sydney CBD and then you travel to work to Melbourne CBD, if we surface similar type of choices to you in Melbourne as well, like that would make your job quite easy. So that's basically what we are trying to work on to sort of like resonate a lot more. So in terms of these personalized experiences, I think in terms of food choices, I think it is a lot more important than coffee, because coffee is pretty standard, right? And in Australia, in most places, you are spoiled for choice, right? So wherever you go, you do end up getting good coffee majority of the times. Whereas with food, I think people have different dietary requirements, personalized choice and all. So that's a harder experience to cater for.
Thanks, Uzair, and thanks for that example on the salad guy. 300 times is a bit too extreme, and I don't know how a person can do that. I think we have another 5 minutes left, and before we end the webinar today, I have a question for all three of you. So personalization is very easy to do with, say, 20,000 users or 50,000 users. But when you scale up, that's when the complexities come in. You can't look at each and every person. So how do you manage personalization at scale? What are the challenges which come up with scale? And also, where can marketing teams go wrong here? And I'm going to start with Tony here, then I'm going to come to Saurabh, and I'm going to end with Uzair.
All right. So whether it's 1 or 100 people, 100,000, 100 million, data hygiene is important, right? It's super key. Now, we at AppsFlyer don't hold the keys to all of that issue. We hold the keys to some of it. But data hygiene is an ongoing challenge that always needs to be checked and managed with a growth strategy for sure. The other issue is when you are scaling, more to your point, right, that data silos become a problem, right, where you've got a DMP, CDP, Excel spreadsheet for your CRM, who knows, right? You've got all of these different data silos, and it's a constant issue, and many SaaS companies promise to solve that for you. But the only way to do that is through good tech as well as planning, right? So solving data silos will assist you when you're scaling, all the issue with data silos. Lastly is flexibility, right? So if you don't have flexibility and you're able to pivot around different data types to get to the same user, then it creates issues for you in your personalization. Any platform that you're working with is going to have some trouble if your data hygiene is impacted, and it creates issues with being able to pivot around that data point.
Thanks. So data silos and data hygiene become really, really important here. I'm going to go to Saurabh. Saurabh, your 2 points here.
Sure. This is a great question. And the answer, I don't think I'll be able to provide in a limited amount of time, but these are the problems with personalization. Like Tony mentioned, data silos, absolutely one of the biggest problems to start off with. Let's say you remove data silos and you ingest it into a single platform, then you have to analyze the data. Let's say you've got a platform to analyze the data. The platform needs to be able to work at scale. It needs to be able to robust enough to run a query, which has got 1 million data points in under 2 minutes or 3 minutes or 10 seconds. If that platform's taking 20 minutes to run your query and you got to build a pivot table within the platform, you're going to fail again. So having the right platform that can actually scale with you is very important as well. After that comes personalization. Let's say, again, I'm talking pure tech here. Let's say you send out another 1 million emails and 200,000 people open those emails and click on the link that leads to your website. Can your website handle that kind of traffic in real time? Is your website scalable enough to handle that kind of traffic? Is your app scalable enough to handle that kind of traffic? So most companies that I see working with here in our ecosystem, they would come and ask, well, we don't want to take a risk with that. Can we stagger our emails? Can we send out a 200 chunk of emails every 30 minutes? Can we not send 1 million within 3 minutes? Because that's going to cause a massive load on our server. Same with push notifications. We have a big e-commerce client here in Indonesia. They're close to 40 million active customers monthly. They send out about 1 billion emails annually, and they like to stagger emails so they don't end up crashing their websites. So just some basic examples. When you start scaling, personalization, the definition of personalization starts changing. You hit problems that you would have not thought of. You could start with MailChimp just to do basic email marketing. But when it comes down to you being able to target people in real time who added a product to your shopping cart, who added a loan service to your shopping cart and did not complete the purchase in 10 minutes, and you want to drive an email just to them in real time, then personalization changes. It's no longer, hi Arijit, hi Tony. The whole concept of personalization changes with scaling. some of those users might be on your website and they may have a web push enabled. So you, rather than sending an email, you do a web push first, wait for them to click on the web push. Maybe they'll complete a purchase right there. So it's a multifold problem. Uzair has been in the space long enough, probably, to know more than I do. So maybe if you take that question to Uzair, we'll get a more articulated answer.
Sure.
But that's it from me.
Thanks, Saurabh. Uzair, now from you, I would want 2 points. Like one, you've scaled Kareem, so you already know what it takes to scale an organization and do the personalization at scale. And secondly, answer from HeyYou's context as to how do you plan to do the same for HeyYou. So if you can just give us insights here.
This is basically a constant work, right? Like, because what Saurabh mentioned is quite important is that in both industries, right? In ride hailing and in this food ordering and coffee ordering, right? There's a really small window in which you need to target people with these personalized messages, right? And so, for example, like for us, the peak time is between 8:30 to 9 a.m., right? That's basically when people purchase their coffees. If you send a message to them at 9:10, it becomes useless, right? And then basically same thing with ride hailing as well, right? Like when people want to go home, right? Like they need to sort of like figure it out within those 5 minutes, right? Like they're not going to wait for like 1 hour so that you can get them a ride, right? Like they're going to figure out an alternative way. So, like scaling this personalization experience becomes a challenge, right? To be honest, right? And every industry, every sort of company goes through it, right? Like we maybe this is one good example, right? Like if you're crashing your server quite often, then basically it's a good problem to have, because that basically means you're growing faster than you can cope up with, right? So it would not probably hold true in all cases, but in quite a few cases, like like this would happen, right? So if your servers are crashing multiple times and basically you're growing faster than you can cope up with, which is a good problem to have, but you need to solve it then, right? Like in terms of like how and what you do. And I think like like getting access to this personalized information is something which can break the server as well, right? Because if you try and do things which are too complicated in a really short amount of time, then like that's basically what might actually, so what you're trying to solve would actually be the one thing which would actually create the problem for you. So you need to sort of like be aware of like maybe I'll go back to Tony's first point, right? That try and keep it simple initially, and do not try to become too adventurous on your first campaign, right? Let sort of like be aware of what the system is capable of. And I think this is basically whereby like what you mentioned is that you need alignment within the team, right? That especially with marketing, product, and engineering, right? They need to sort of be on one page, because mistakes that marketing team would make, right? Like they probably would underestimate the capacity of the servers and all. And by nature, right? Like by nature, this is what marketing people need to do, right? They need to be creative and they need to be aggressive in terms of like getting the results. So the more adventurous marketing people would try and experiment and push the system to the limits. So it needs to be done in conjunction and in planning with the, and I think we've been in these situations. Sometimes I think like with marketing teams, they don't know what would get crazy response as well, right? So I remember at a time when the marketing team ran a campaign, it crashed servers, right? And there was a huge backlash from the product and tech team in terms of like what did you guys do, right? Why would you not sort of align us in terms of this campaign that you were running? And the response from the marketing was that we never expected the campaign to go so well, right? So as I said, I think sometimes it's a good problem to have, but I think like if it happens too often, then that's basically a bad user experience. So that's one thing. And then I think I just want to end with this final thought in terms of like marketing teams, right? Like I think keep the message simple, right? Like do not try to be too adventurous, like try and do things in a simple way. And whenever you're trying to communicate with customers, if you are trying to communicate multiple things at the same time, then it's very likely that the customers would get very, very confused, right? So an example which comes to mind is that going back to my marketing class in school, right? We're doing a case study on Honda versus Toyota. And there was a point in time when Toyota was losing slightly, like their market share, because people perceived Honda to design much more beautiful cars. And then what Toyota did was that they tried to copy in their campaign that not only are they reliable, but they've got more beautiful cars. And actually the market share accelerated in terms of decreasing, right? So it actually had the opposite effect. And they had to backtrack and then come back with a campaign which was reliability in motion. So one simple message which people could get, and that sort of like like yielded much better results. So I guess like, yeah, that's the final thought, that keep message simple, keep things simple, and that would sort of like get much better results.
Thanks, Uzair. And I think that's an MBA case study, the Toyota and Honda one. It's taught in a lot of B schools, if I'm not wrong. Cool. Thanks, Uzair. I think we ran 5 minutes overboard. I'm really sorry, everyone. We took a little extra time, but it's been a very interesting conversation today.